Welcome to another episode of Corporate CPR, where we breathe life back into your organization, projects, and processes, giving you insights to recovery and avoiding corporate mortality events. Today, we'll be talking about how to break through the noise to recruit great talent, and joining us to contribute to the conversation is Joe Mullings. Welcome, Joe.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Would you like to introduce yourself to our audience? Tell a little bit about your background.
Sure. So Joe Mullings, I am a search consultant. We own the largest search firm in the world in the health tech, med tech industry. We've made more than 8,000 placements in the medical device industry. We're about 40 people with facilities here in the US as well as abroad in the UK. And we are the only search firm, and we'll talk about this today. We're the only search firm with a full media company, marketing company, and production company. I'm talking to you from our studios today here in Delray Beach. And I think it's a critical component for the war for talent going on today in the world of work.
Well, it's a great studio, and you are the first company that I've heard of that recruits but has their own studio. So that's pretty cool. So we're talking today about cutting through the noise and recruiting great talent. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you see that noise being and what that means to you?
Yeah, the noise today, boy, it's gotten really hectic. A lot of white noise going on. And what I mean by white noise, if we just look at the dynamics since February of 2020, without this being a pandemic centric sort of chat, but the job market was already hyper competitive before Feb of 2020. But once we've introduced this WFX, the work from anywhere environment, it's really switched the deck both on the individual side, who's out in the marketplace, as well as the company side. Companies are still trying to decide, what does their workforce look like? Is it work from anywhere? Is it work from hybrid? Can we find talent around the globe instead of the geographic arbitrage that was required originally? And then the individuals are looking for careers right now are saying, heck, well, hold on a second. I might be able to work for anybody in the world and not have to move from where I'm living today. And then appealing to that populace, both the candidate side as well as the company side, if you're an individual looking for an opportunity or the company looking for an individual, that has really shuffled the deck quite a bit. And it's changed the dynamics of how you look for talent for your organization.
Have you noticed that I feel like a lot of these conversations lately are always spoken in a macro level of, saying we can work from anywhere and you can hire from around the world. But one of the nuances that I guess I'd get your thoughts on, what expectations can we have then of these worldwide employees working the core business hours of the business? Should they, or are we talking about resources that don't need to work those hours, and those are the roles that we're sourcing from around the world?
I think that'll be role and function specific. So if you're somebody who's involved in corporate strategy, internal comms, and there is a headquarters, let's say there's a headquarters, you know what you're signing up for. And if you're 3 or 4 time zones away, so in other words, you're working in New York and you're an Israeli player and you've got a 7-hour time difference, you can't expect the company to bend their workplace to their hours. So that's one. And then what has creeped into the industry right now, and I'm not saying it's good or bad, is turning off your cell phone, your mobile phone, or your comms after 5 o'clock in the local area at night. And there seems to be, an over-indexing in that right now in the workforce as to separating personal and professional life, which, is another conversation altogether. So if you are going to be looking for roles outside your, if you will, 9 to 5 time zone in where you live, you ought to be prepared to compromise your work hours to meet what your team is working within. And having said that, though, I just came out of a meeting, an organization that is in excess of $700 million a year. They don't have any corporate headquarters, and they've got almost 500 employees. And they get together on a regular basis quarterly around the globe and meet with their leadership team and executive team. And instead of, say, having a $400,000 a year rent payment, $400,000 a month payment for rent, they are now breaking that out and using it for corporate travel and get-togethers at different areas of the world in order for their leadership team to connect and spend 4 or 5 days together for 10-hour days.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's I find that creating connection, a lot of I keep hearing the mantra, oh, everybody can work remotely and it worked great and we're more efficient. And I would challenge that 100% remote is more efficient. Firmly believe that remote. I'm glad in the sense that the pandemic introduced the concept to a lot of companies that it is possible, because there were some companies that were had very archaic practices around it, and didn't offer any of that to their employees. But on the flip side, now you've got a lot of employees who've enjoyed it and they're pushing for it. But I find you lose a lot in collaboration.
Yep, you
So
do.
we focus on project management, and yeah, a lot of the project can be done remote, but there are some critical points in the project that is very valuable to have your team co-located.
There's no replacement for in person. So let's just straighten that out right now, because if there's somebody who's watching this that has not experienced Zoom fatigue, then you're probably not human. And so that's number one. The second thing is we were over indexed to having to be in the office, as you pointed out. Organizations mandated that somebody be in there 5 days a week. And now what's happened is the worker now is in charge in this workplace for the first time in the history of the world of work. They are dictating what they want, as you pointed out. Having said that, let's be careful not to over-index towards the other extreme, because business models were built around people being face to face for the most part. Those organizations that were not built for face to face really didn't experience much of a hiccup, and their business model still holds true. But if you have an organization that is like a 40-person firm like ours is, and your rent payment is $40,000 a month, and your motto is built around people being in the office, and now suddenly you have employees who want to be out of the office and want all the benefits of that, yet the expenses and the infrastructure was built in office. You've got to give both parties a chance to breathe, have a transition occur. The plan that you had on February in 2020 and your response one day later to the throat punch, thinking that that is the same plan that should be in place today, everybody's hallucinating. And if you're the employee and you're going to try and hold your current or future employer at bay, that their model doesn't represent a hybrid or work from distance, you might end up putting your company at risk in regards to profitability and ultimately maybe even existing. And so you might win the battle but lose the war.
Well, and I think in some ways there's even unintended consequences to the employee. I think a lot of people don't realize the value of sitting next to a peer and overhearing conversations. From a personal development perspective, hearing how somebody handles a tough customer, something like that, you can be like, oh, that sounded really good, I should apply that. Or just the organic picking up of information that you can assimilate into, whatever work you're doing.
Well, also think about this. Unless you've been 20 years plus in the industry, you lose all mentoring opportunities. I'm not suggesting at 20 years plus you don't have mentors, but if you're just entering the industry and you're in your first, fifth, eighth, 10th year, there is no way to mentor in a two-dimensional Zoom world. It's not reasonable. And so I'm really concerned about this next generation coming into the workforce that's over-indexing towards wanting to be remote all the time, that their personal development is going to come at the risk of an entire category of worker. And I think if we follow that longitudinally out over the next 10, 15, 20 years, it'll be a seriously interesting study to submit.
Yeah, absolutely. Not that we want to dig into this, but it'd be even interesting to see from a social construct, as in so many people build their their friendships, get married, etc., from meeting and associating to people at work, and you're kind of taking that community away. And it would be interesting to see where that community is then found, because people will still need community. Does it come back to your neighborhood, or does it resurface somewhere else? It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Mm-hmm. And what happens there too, and you bring up a very interesting point. It's the same reason why careers, I think, will also be dramatically affected, because I think you're going to stay in a company longer than you should have. And I think you're going to leave companies shorter than you should have, because in order for you to get that experience, as you pointed out just a few minutes ago, of how did he or she handle that exchange in the hallway? How did they handle that exchange in the cubicle next to them? Those are going to introduce enormous voids in the learning process. So now you're going to have to stay in a place a lot longer than you should have to realize the experience that you would have gotten in person in a more concentrated fashion. So that this is going to be an incredibly interesting study moving forward. I hope that we return back to a more in-person, for the good of commerce, in-person environment, but at least explore the workforce that I think will be paid differently. I think you're going to have pay coming out differently. I think you're going to have time off managed differently. And I think you're going to have functional roles designed that you can be remote, but you're going to get paid less in the same function as somebody who's in-house. And that would be appropriate.
So that's interesting. I'd like to take a moment and just touch on pay briefly before we take a step back and talk more strategic. But one of the things that's challenging about remote working is, with a lot of these knowledge-based roles, it's hard to tell sometimes how productive people are. And that's a lot of fear that managers sometimes have is like, are my people actually working, or are they off watching Netflix or doing something else? And I don't believe in micromanaging our employees, but one thought that came to mind is there a way to do more pay for deliverables or pay for outcome rather than like just a traditional salary? Be curious what your thoughts are.
But it's a fair question. It'll come down to job function and job category. Look, I watched organizations where people were able to goof off when they were in the office all day long, whether they were watching something on their iPhone or walking around the hallways or going to the coffee machine 12 times a day, or, even taking extended lunches. I think somebody who's going to try and cheat the system will cheat it anywhere they are. So that's number one. I, I do worry about, and again, I come back to the 1, 2, 3 years out of university. When you come out of university, or you're just entering the workforce, let's not even assume you went to university. You look at somebody and you say, and it's like self-pacing while you're running if you don't run with somebody else a mile. If you're running with other people who are just a 10-second per mile difference on a 5-minute pace, it's a dramatic difference. But as you run with those people, you can go ahead and build up the load that your lungs and your legs can handle. Mm. And so when you are sitting isolated in a closet at home, you lose that compounding effect every day, every week, every month, every year. And I do believe that people who exercise by themselves versus with a group of people, whatever the exercise, will always have better outcomes because they have a rabbit to chase if their intention is good. And so I do think that whether you're a salesperson, an ops person, a project manager, a customer service, those who want to perform will perform better if they have other rabbits that they have to chase. And so inspection of work is a whole nother category, Orwellian by nature. But I don't even like to have conversations about inspecting work, because you're not even talking about team players there. You're trying to figure out, how much of my life am I going to take in return for salary, and how am I going to make sure it's a quid pro quo, and how little can I perform? I'm not sure that this podcast or the category of work that you put together would address those people, or would they even watch this?
No, that's some interesting thoughts. Well, we've spent some time talking about the different challenges that can come with the environment we're in right now. Let's talk a little bit then about, as a leader of an organization, how do I approach the strategy of what my workforce makeup is going to be?
Well, the first thing you have to do is, and I consult for a number of Fortune 50 companies and a lot of emerging tech startup companies and venture capital companies. The critical discipline requires in the problem statement first, right? So I think Elon Musk said it recently, which I thought was brilliant. He said, if we're trying to increase the efficiencies right now in the subject on the table, Should this problem even exist, or should we restate what the problem statement is? So increasing efficiencies in something that maybe shouldn't exist is something that's silly. So that's the first thing is what's the problem statement, not what is the problem we're trying to solve. So having the discipline to do that first. And the employment complex is a very, very complex subject. It's not as simple as who should be in the office, who shouldn't be in the office, what day should they be in the office. So instead, who is the customer? What are you trying to deliver? What's the service we're trying to deliver? Can it be automated? Can it be outsourced? Can it be co-sourced? What is the requirement for it? And again, what is the customer experience we're trying to deliver? What is the product we're trying to deliver? And if the workforce that we were used to before February 2020 never existed, and we had the opportunity to rethink it, what would it look like today? I think that's the question that every executive team and ownership should start with, rather than trying to figure out, let's keep it 80% of what it was, but how do we satiate the 20% that don't want to do it that way? I'm not sure that's the right way to do this.
So the approach that you're talking about, really looking at what each individual, who their customer is, what their output is, et cetera. Are you thinking that the best way to approach it is all the way down to the individual or the department, or how far deep do we go in that analysis to understand?
Well, again, let's start. What is my customer expect? And maybe all my Excel spreadsheets that I made are no longer valid. Maybe all my SOPs, operating procedures in the organization, are no longer valid. Maybe that job description no longer requires one person, but it requires three, and that other job doesn't even exist anymore. So I think looking at your workflow relative to the service that you're delivering to the customer then starts to backwards inform what does your workforce look like. And granted, we can't just flip a switch, right? These business models have been built over centuries for the most part, decades at a minimum. And so a switch can't be thrown overnight. However, what you can do if you're a courageous executive team is to look at the service, look at the product. What does the requirement look like in order to deliver that service or product in the emerging world of work that we're in today? And that's answering your question. Then you start to reverse engineer that. Can technology solve that? Does a new worker define that? Does a new workflow? Does a new team? So that's, and given the transition of technology today and all that has occurred and been accelerated over the last 26 months, we've got some new tools that we never had before, and we've got some new opportunities that we've never had before, and we've also have access to talent that we never had before. So my recommendation would be start at what you're trying to deliver and then figure out what the MVP, the minimal viable product is to deliver that, and throw away your beliefs of the past.
Yeah, you kind of touched on where my next question was going to be. I was thinking that sounds like a really long project, especially if you think about some of these organizations and how long it takes them to do any sort of transformation. And so I think it really boils down to what's that minimally viable product. How would you try to put a time box onto that? Like, try to get your minimally viable product, the scope to equate to a year or 18 months. Like, at what point are you dragging on too long? And then you are actually probably in the midst of rework because the environment's changed yet again.
Well, that I'm glad you brought that up. So look, the dynamics of the business world, the commerce world, the capitalistic world is more diverse, dynamic, and will be changing. And this pandemic, other than the lives lost, has been a blessing on commerce, because it's going to force us to have an agility that we never ever thought of before. In other words, the worker is going to change dramatically. So we were very heavily indexing towards an over specialization in our environment. And we were building these trenches of specialization so deep that they couldn't see over to the trench next to them. And we were starting to build these trenches so deep, and then we lost the agility of thought. We started to introduce all this dogma on how a problem needed to be solved in the cubicle or the 10,000 square foot office we had. And so when we introduced this catalyst of the pandemic, we've introduced a requirement for a more agile worker, from an emotional agility, this need to, we were already there, but we didn't realize it. We need to start looking at workers who are didactic or self-didactic employees. They are open to learning, and we're going to start hiring people on the ability to be taught, learn, master, kill that skill, work, learn, master, kill that skill. And the person who's willing to be a fool before they're the master, I think is going to have the highest value from the masses moving forward. And so I think we introduced that future employee. It's going to take a while before the industry realizes that, because we're making a U-turn with the Queen Mary here. But that generalist who has that agility emotionally and intellectually will be a sought after player.
I think that helps. Finding those types of people also help the overall culture of the organization, because one of the things that I've found in a lot of companies we've consulted in is they hire the technical skills and not the character. Well, as you're pointing out, the technical skills can be taught. Character is much harder, because you have to have an individual who, one, notices they have notices their character flaws, two, be willing to do something about it, and then three, it takes a while. So I think there's not enough importance placed on what type of person am I hiring.
Well, yeah, sure. And so character is one thing. There was a study done a couple of years ago with one of the top performing groups in the world, the U.S. Navy SEALs, and when they interviewed the members of the SEAL teams, they said, if you had a teammate, and people's lives depended on this, their skill level was high, but their trust level was low, or their trust level was high and their skill level was low, which would you take? Nobody breathed. And they said, give me high trust, lower skill all day long. So that's one. You brought that subject up, from skill and integrity. Like, the most dangerous person in the world is a high IQ with low integrity. That person, and we all have that avatar in our head of that person we've worked with in the past. Low integrity, high IQ, very dangerous human being. But what we are going to start seeing more of is people who are able to manage and move across multiple domains, because you've got all the information you ever need in the world at your fingertips right now on your iPhone or your mobile, whatever it is. But what to do with that at the right time, with the right people, with the right intention, I do believe is what we're going to start looking towards, because we've got all the information that's ever been accumulated in the history of the world on a mobile device, or in the scientist sitting next door who's sitting in his or her, again, trench. But how do I take them out? How do I deploy them? And then how do I move the ball forward with my product or service?
It's interesting. So let's talk about, now that we maybe we've defined what our workforce is, we've shed the pieces we don't need, we've automated, et cetera. And we want to hire global talent. Now, obviously, there's a lot of challenges, from language to time zones to all of that. So how do we approach having a more global workforce? Because there's obviously a lot of value. People have different skill sets are more prominent in different cultures, right? Based on what that culture happens to be good at. So how do we leverage that in the most effective way?
So before we jump into geography and culture, what an organization has to get its head wrapped around, and I do believe executive leadership needs to have their bonus tied to this, the C-suite should, is, what is your company's hiring brand? So I know what your product brand is. I know what your service brand is, but I want to know what your hiring brand is, because the best performers in the world are not looking at want ads. The best performers in the world are not going to send a resume into HR. Never. And that never going to happen. They usually get their next career opportunity through networking.
Yeah.
However, if you build a hiring brand that continually talks about these three categories, the first category is, why is the market that you're in going to have substantial relevance to the world, at least over the next 5 years? That's category one. The second category is, how does your product or service address that profound market over the next 5 years, and why is it so unique? And then the third one is the leadership. Who am I going to hang around with every day? Who will I become? And who will my network ultimately become when I leave this job, or they leave it and call me for my next job? Those are the three underpinnings of a hiring narrative that needs to be out in the public domain 24/7. And that has to tell stories, not advertise. That has to uniquely set up a dialogue of, on LinkedIn, short and long form video, short and long form copy, even newsletters. And you have got to tell a story over time. Almost think about your hiring brand as your network television show, covering all kinds of subjects. So when Susie Smith is busy at work, but she happens to hop on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is a learning platform, it's not a job platform. And the quicker that companies get that through their head, the better they are. And you start to tell your company story at large. Every single day you start, and they start to see, what market are you in? And why is that market great? What's the product that you're selling in that service? Who are the rock stars, and who could I become when I go to work at that company? I had a bad day. Or 3 years, I'm done here. I'm not learning anymore. I've been watching ABC Company for a while now. On LinkedIn, I'm going to reach out to the chief marketing officer and make a friend. That is how the companies are going to win moving forwards, because that's how you attract your force multipliers, what I call your lightning rod hires. The people who, once they go to your company, they have a pull through of other talent that you can now start to top grade your organization. That's the strategy that organizations moving forward will start to dominate their markets in.
So some of our listeners are in the middle of the organization in a leadership role. What things can they be doing when they don't have such a strategic influence, but they still have influence over who's on their team?
Well, if I was in corporate America today, and part of my livelihood, my raise, my bonus, my happiness in the role I have, I would go out and find the top 100 people that I would love to have work for me on LinkedIn. And I would connect with them. And I would nurture those relationships. I would send out an email and say, hey, Joe Mullings here. Listen, I run the world's top search firm in medical device. You're probably not looking today. Having said that, I'm reaching out to who I think the top 100 people are that I would at least like to have a relationship with. And I'd like you to think about coming here, or at least considering coming here, should you ever pick your head up. Because if you do pick your head up, you should be looking at 2 or 3 opportunities. Give me a call if you ever start to look. I don't need your resume. I got it on LinkedIn. Let's stay connected. And then every time, this takes deliberation. Every time you see an article that's interesting, you send that to the in-mail on LinkedIn to that person, those top 100 people. Every time you have a company release or something cool in the company happens, you send that to that person on LinkedIn. And then if you do that to the top 100 people that you have decided that they could be part of your team, even if you got 2 or 3 of those people out of those 100 coming to work for you, it's a career changer for you. That is a way that you don't have to worry about HR. You don't have to worry about the executive team. That alone sets you up as your own recruiter, and it takes some tending to. Every Saturday and Sunday morning, while you're having your tea, your coffee, whatever it is, figure out where they are, put them on a project list, get an article. That will show people that you care about who you work with, and you start sharing your company and maybe your department story and your personal story, because people go to work for people.
That's powerful. It's interesting because that takes to what I was trying to do, even to a next, well, maybe might help start my process better. Because what I've been trying to do is I use a talent pool where I try to invite people to my community to join and like, hey, build a little tribe of, hey, we're interested in working for your company. And then what I wanted to do with that is build, like you're saying, build a relationship to the point where maybe even meet up and go out for lunch, to the point that you actually know these people. So as soon as they're, in our case, it's more about there's a vacancy available. Be like, hey, we have this. Do you want to come join our team? And now they know what we're about. We know what they're about. And there's a lot of confidence and a lot of speed to hire. Your LinkedIn strategy sounds extremely powerful.
And even beyond that, let's take it a step beyond. So they've been watching you, but they say, Thanks for the invite, but I'm not looking. However, I know somebody. And now you've connected nodes there. And they'll say, listen, I've been watching corporate CPR. They put out some cool stuff. They reached out to me. I'm not looking, but I think you guys should connect. But one of the things that's important here, that's a key to this strategy working, and this is how headhunters work, great headhunters work, is you've constantly got to be giving and teaching. You can't make it an ask. You can't say, join my network. And I'm not inferring that that's only what you do. You've got to start to give educational content to those people. And if you identify top 100 people, you know what they all have in common? They're lifelong learners. And so if you provide them with information, if not but for that you gleaned out and shared it with them, you might not hit it every single time with the content you give, but suddenly you're giving. And that is how you build a relationship. You recruit when you don't need the person. You give when you want to get. And that is what's forgotten oftentimes when you're trying to build a team. Typically, you respond, we need to hire. You end up hiring the best person who you can find or is available in a 60-day window. That is not a good strategy longitudinally to build a killer team.
Do you have then strategies for the person who may not need a job now, but maybe has a company in mind that they're like, man, I'd love to be a part of that company? How do you have strategies on how that person can get a job that maybe doesn't even exist in that company?
It's a very similar strategy. If I'm on the other side and I'm the individual, I'm going to look for either the company or the person. And remember, I said just a minute ago, we go to work for people, not companies. So I think every single person who's watching this would go to work for Warren Buffett for free if you're in finance for a year. So I use that as an extreme example. Why don't you pick the top 100 people you think you'd like to work for, not the company that they work for? Odds are they might be in it. And introduce yourself with your background and your accomplishments, and just reach out and stay connected to them and say, listen, if anything ever comes up in these areas, I'm committed to this. This is how I've proven it. Let's stay in touch. And every single 4 weeks, 6 weeks, drop them a line on something that you accomplished. Like, right, here's what the problem was. Here's what I did. Here's what I accomplished. This was the outcome and the benefit to the company. Thought I'd share it with you. And if you keep on dripping that to them, you won't be annoying. And again, if you're a top player, you're not sharing the fact that you changed the toilet bowl, the toilet paper in the bathroom at 2 o'clock today to them. You're actually picking meaningful events that matter probably to them. Keep it in context that would matter to the VP of sales or the VP of marketing or the VP of clinical. Say, just finished this project, thought you'd be aware of it, keeping you in mind in case anything ever happens in your company that you need somebody like me, please let me know. I will tell you as a headhunter, 25 to 30% of the hires that end up getting made is a job that wasn't created in our searches. They run across somebody, they give us a profile. That person doesn't meet the profile, but they're such a rock star that they create a role for that person.
Yeah, no, it's, I think that happens more often than people realize. You know, if a lot of people want to grab up the rock stars while they're available, versus risking not being able to get them in their company.
That's right.
When you project yourself, 10 years into the future, what do you think all of this looks like that we've been talking about so far?
I think we continue to see technology with a blockchain-like approach, and I'll share this. I think the candidate, the individual, is in charge. I think what happens is that you will have let's call it a product called Candidate Locker. You will have our own profile that will be much more than our resume and much more than our LinkedIn profile. On that will be a collection of who I am as a human being, meaning I'm pursuing a pilot's license. This is what my hobbies are, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I have a black belt in that. Here I am on my trip to Iceland with my camera, and I like taking pictures. Here's my skill sets. Here's the last 5 projects I've worked on. I think what's going to happen is you're going to have a LinkedIn style environment where somebody can go in and see just enough of your background. They can reach out to you and say, Bob, I like your background. I'll be Bob, the candidate. Great. Shoot me what you're looking for. I'll then say, I'm going to give you this. Here's the code. You can get in there. It can't be passed to anybody else. You have 24 hours to look at it. And what this does is eliminates the ghosting of candidates or resumes sitting on HR's desk. You have 24 hours. Here's your code to get in. After that, it's gone. If you want to have a conversation after that, I'll decide. And so that is where the individual is going to be in charge, and it's going to force corporations to respect the individual, because the individual will have all the data, and people will start hiring human beings instead of what they read online as a resume and make massive judgments there. But the human being will decide what they meter to the audience that they're sending their information to, but it'll be much more than a resume. That is what will happen in the next 10 years. And you will have ratings. So let me finish up. The same way you have a credit rating right now, when you go to want to buy a house or a car and your credit rating is 740 because you've been a good citizen, but that is the rating by banks and finance institutions that are betting on your reputation. All the claims that you make, you will get ratings from people. And so this won't be your opinion. You will be rated by people in the past who will be able to rate you and not have to worry about the liability when you're asked to give a reference from a corporation, but HR doesn't allow you to do that. You will have ratings. In other words, as a human being, if I want to hire somebody, we're going to go well beyond background checks. And so your ultimate performers will reveal that information where it can't be copied, it can't be passed along. Here's, again, a credit-like score in a professional environment, plus who I am as a human being. Right now, we hire in a resume and good interview performance. And we bet big on that. And that's quite ridiculous if you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Resumes obviously favor those who can either write well or hire somebody who writes well and turn it into a marketing document. And interviews are obviously very selective and myopic on what either the interviewer or interviewee has to say. So I completely agree.
It's like getting married after a second date. I mean, seriously, it's the same level of commitment.
Absolutely. Joe, this has been a really fascinating conversation and really valuable. I'd love to hear what your, kind of the top three takeaways that you would have for our conversation.
Sure. So the first and probably most important is the question that the individual should ask themselves, and the question that the company that's trying to hire them should answer is, who will I become when I go to work with you? And that is not answered enough. We look at job descriptions that say must have, should have, needs to have experience in, which is all important, but tell me who I'm going to become. And then make sure when you consider a company, you need to ask yourself, who will you become? So that's number one. Number two is, in your first 5 years of your career, don't worry about who you want to be. It's too hard. Figure out what you don't want to do in your first 5 years and rattle through that in your career quickly. Test, try, decide, get out. I see too many young people who got told to go to college by their parents or their aunts or a guidance counselor, went to college, thought they spent the money, and now keep themselves as a prisoner in that career for the next 40 years. And they become miserable. Their marriages, their relationships, their health suffers because of it. And then finally, remain a lifelong learner. Odds are that most people who watch this stop learning in earnest at 21 to 22 years old. And you got another 40 years ahead of you. Make sure that you remain a lifelong learner, because it will pay dividends intellectually, physically, and financially.
Absolutely. Well, those are great tips, Joe. Thank you so much for being a part of the show. How can people get in contact with you to learn more?
Sure. So LinkedIn, Joe Mullings, Mullings. And I also have a website, joemullings.com. Please go to either of those if you can.
Well, that's great. Thanks again for being on our show.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks so much.
And to our audience, until next time, keep your organizations healthy.